Hi, Pearl.
Hi, Scott.
Tonight we're going to be talking about a very disturbing subject. It's how the corporate world are now putting their weight behind this whole LGBTQ agenda.
I think right now we're actually focusing on the whole Woolworth Saga.
Yes, we are.
And maybe just to give a little background, maybe to Woolworths, because this is not the first time that we've had some issues with Woolworths. I remember as far back as 2010 when Woolworths had pulled all the Christian magazines from their racks. So they didn't pull any other magazines, but the Christian magazines, they just decided they're not selling them anymore. And I mean, the reason why I'm saying this is because I think there's definitely an agenda which is an anti-church and an anti-Christian agenda. And I think that there was a definite boycott of Woolworths until Woolworths actually brought back the Christian magazines.
If you remember, at the end of 2019, there was this massive campaign against comprehensive sexuality education that the government was trying to push onto the schools right at the last minute in November, just before the December school holidays. We managed to grow a Facebook group of over 130,000 people, and we opposed CSE in our schools at every chance we had, culminating in action we took on the 13th of February during the State of the Nation address all across South Africa. Parents came together and gave the same statement declaring that we have parental rights over our children and government should not interfere in that. And what happened as a result of that is that the Minister of Basic Education said that the comprehensive sexuality education is no longer compulsory. And the government has not rested since that moment. We got very caught up in the pandemic that happened, of course, the entire country and the group, of course. Parents had a lot of other things to worry about, such as livelihood. People were losing jobs. People had to school their kids at home because kids weren't allowed at school, and life got really, really crazy. And the government, of course, does not sleep. It's extremely important that you take note of what is happening in your children's schools. And in effect, what they've done is completely circumnavigated any public participation process and have completely avoided consultation with parents.
The ECE Toolkit is a teacher training program that was developed by the Department of Basic Education, thanks to, as is often the case, a 40 million rand grant from a Belgian-based organization called VVOB, and in consultation and in cooperation with the University of Stellenbosch. Now, you would think that a teacher training program sounds fairly innocuous, but this is not training teachers in some new blackboard technique or some technology. This is teaching teachers to basically create a culture of transgender ideology within the classroom. And we're talking here specifically the classrooms of pre-primary and primary school age children. That's children between 0 to 9 years of age. In other words, little children who have absolutely no way of processing this type of information. So that's what the ECE Toolkit is. That's what it's doing. I should tell you that they piloted it in 2019, which was about the same time as there was this big fight against comprehensive sexuality education being mainlined into schools. And thereafter, they have rolled it out in, we know, at least 5 provinces. So this is not only done, it's happening, and it may even be wider and more prevalent than we think at the moment.
The census results that came out says that I think it's over 80% of South Africans are Christians. And I think it's safe to say that the majority of South Africans, especially the voter base, are at least conservative in their values. And their values are centered around the traditional family unit. And I find it very interesting that the government is pushing something so contrary to that.
The coalition accused the DBE of indoctrinating small children into transgender ideology at an age where they cannot possibly process what they're being taught. It reminded the DBE that its own policy states that parents have the inalienable right to educate and raise their children according to their own values and beliefs. It demanded that the state training of pre-primary and primary school teachers be stopped immediately. And it asked for a family values unit to be set up within the DBE to ensure that a diversity of views are always considered.
So let's stay true to our values and let our leaders represent those values and consult with us, because consultation is a original aspect of our own African system. We consult. We have imbizos. We have Khotla system. We've always consulted. And so I beg of the leaders, continue that system of consultation and don't become dictators. The dictator system is not something that we want to embrace in this continent. We just need people who will just be bold enough and brave enough to say no and to push back. You know, we've seen it happen in nations before, where nations just said, we're not going to put up with this. But when you blindly close your eyes and give over your right to life and give over the direction of your life to leaders who show that they don't have your interests at heart or your children's interests at heart, then you're going to get what you deserve. So, I mean, legislation is one part of it. Another part of it is vote. You just have to vote. Where you see that leaders are misrepresenting your interests, you have to vote and you have to be alert. You cannot abstain from voting and say there's no purpose, in my voting, and then expect a change in outcome. No, you have to vote. So participating in the legislative process, even if it looks like it's futile.
What can you tell us about that Belgium-based organization?
Well, they're essentially set up to bring what they call inclusive values into education. And they're obviously very well financed. But here's the strange thing. You know, we talk a lot at the moment about African solutions for African problems. And we talk a lot about decolonization. And yet here comes an international organization bringing in views and values and an ideology which is actually completely foreign to the vast majority of the people in South Africa, whether you come from a religious background or whether you just simply have traditional values because of the culture that you've grown up in and that you've inherited from generations. And yet here comes this thing which is now effectively being imposed upon everybody's children. And this is really quite extraordinary. And as I say, it's particularly extraordinary because it is so contrary to the views and values of the vast majority of South Africans. And secondly, of course, it is completely in conflict with the international and local laws that govern the very area that we're talking about.
And the anti-family agenda, definitely we've known that for many years now. Scott, I remember doing videos with Errol Naidu as far back as 2014, fighting for the preservation of the family. And that is the main reason why Western nations are targeting Africa and African nations, because African nations are very pro-family. Our cultural values are centered around Ubuntu, are centered around esteeming one another, are centered around preserving the family unit. We believe in extended family. We have resisted a lot of the imposition of Western values. And so we see these companies now targeting Africa, specifically targeting them and using the banner of human rights. You know, they've redefined human rights, where human rights are no longer human rights, they're human wrongs.
Yeah.
Because human rights used to be about protection of life, about provision of basic amenities and protection of life. But now, you know, abortion is listed as a human right, is counted as a human right, which means human rights has now evolved from the right from protection of life to taking away of life. And it's very concerning for African nations, because now the human rights redefined agenda is focused on trying to get Africa to bend its knee, to take away its family values, its belief in Ubuntu, its belief in protecting the family unit, and is using the carrot stick of money. So they're going to different African nations, saying, if you don't impose this redefined human rights, we're not going to give you money. We're not going to. And in spite of that, African nations have been defiant. You've got nations like Uganda and Kenya who've been defiant and said, keep your money. Keep your money, but we will not accept this form. It's a form of cultural imperialism, really, Scott. That's what it is. It's very strategic. It's very aggressive. It's very controlling and manipulative by trying to force African nations to bow to their cultural imperialistic values. By saying that, look, if you don't, we won't give you money, or else we will isolate you, or we will have sanctions against you. It's very controlling and manipulative.
The paramount interest that you have to consider when educating, and even just constitutionally, is what is in the best interest of children. Is it in the best interest of children to confuse them deeply? Is it in the best interest of children to literally divide them from their parents, or to divide the teachers from the parents? How can this possibly be in the best interest of children?
How does that make you feel as a parent? And how much longer are we going to let the government take control of our children in this way? Well, I cannot believe that those that came up with this ECE toolkit have children themselves. Because if they did, they'll know that a child will throw a tantrum over the color spoon that they have to eat their breakfast with. Children can't make decisions, and they're not emotionally mature enough to weigh the information being presented to them. So they're just going to absorb it like a sponge. It's going to become their reality, and we will find that our children are complete aliens to us as they get older, and we won't understand what happened. Meanwhile, it was the school curriculum, and now it's not being put into life orientation necessarily. The government is clever. The government has circumnavigated that. Never say that the government's stupid, because it's not. They've found a way to get into the minds of our children through training the teachers first.